Human groups are made of human systems. This show stands at the practical intersection of counterintelligence, trauma psychology, and systems thinking. My research focuses on how people, groups, and institutions lose the ability to see reality clearly, and what happens when decisions keep getting made anyway. I'm Kip Perez, and this has changed the game.
Welcome back to Change the Game. One of the questions that comes up again and again on the show is simple. How do humans actually navigate reality well? And everything from, that includes everything from how we make decisions to how we notice what matters. How do we make sense of a complex environment? And how do we take action in a way that fits the reality that we're in? So my guest today has been thinking pretty deeply about that problem. Adam Karaoguz writes the Renaissance Human Substack, where he's been developing what he calls the A-frame. It's a framework for understanding how agents, that's you and me and lots of other things that we'll get into, move through the world through cycles of attention, appreciation, and action, ultimately leading toward what he calls attunement. It's a pretty big synthesis from Boyd and complexity science and narrative theory and a bunch of other factors. So today we're going to explore the model. We're going to see where it lines up with Boydian orientation and maybe push on a few places and see if we can make it interesting. So, Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, first question out of the gate, what were you trying to solve? What problem were you trying to fix with the A-frame?
Well, that's a great question. I think I've been a student of the OODA loop for many years. The great book on it is Science, Strategy, and War by Franz Osinga. But as I study OODA, I listen to my brothers Mark McGrath and Paunch talking about it, and they're really putting orientation forward as like the main part of that four-stroke model of OODA. And I was kind of uncomfortable with that because I wanted to foreground exactly like the most important part. And then I wasn't a fan of like a four-stroke model. I wanted to get it to a trinity. So that is some of my personal bias. Is I'm a fan of trinities as like a more stable platform to build things on than like the four. Like, are there things that are fours? Yes, obviously compass points, four seasons. But I really wanted to make it a trinity, and then I wanted to foreground, what the emphasis was as separate from that trinity, and that's where I kind of came up with the A-frame.
You are also a fan of the letter A, I notice.
Yes, I have some sort of mild mental illness where I'm just a fan of alliteration, and as I started kind of building the model out, I'm like, hey, all these start with A. This is really weird. And then my name, my middle name's Anthony, so it's like Adam Anthony. I'm like, this is a weird coincidence. Let's roll with it. Let's see how far we can take this thing. And you could take it pretty far is the answer.
Yes, yes, you can. Yes, you have. So, for listeners hearing all of this for the first time, talk to me about just kind of briefly agent arena agency attunement.
Mhm.
What is that in layman's terms?
Yeah. So other thinkers like cognitive scientist John Vervaeke, they'll talk about the agent arena relationship, right? So we have the world out there, we're calling the arena. Like that's where we got to make moves, we got to do things. We have to interact with a lot of chaos and uncertainty out in that arena. That's just your daily life. And that could be a battlefield, that could just be going to your job or raising your kids, right? So that's the arena. And then us as individuals, we are the agents, and then we are enacting agency, like we are acting out in that arena. So those are three A's right there: the agent, arena, and agency going on. And so with that, I tried to think of what is the reality navigational model that kind of goes with that. That's sits inside of both OODA and then storytelling, and we can kind of get back into the kind of the narrative side of this later. But in brief, what you're doing is a three-step non-linear recursive process, meaning like you don't necessarily have to go step by step. It can jump back and forth. You can go right from attention to action without a lot of appreciation, and you see that in a lot of chaotic contexts. But in brief, attention, I want to foreground attention in this world right now because everybody's attention is pulled in so many different ways. Our attention is being harvested and mined by corporations. So attention is really, I wanted to highlight the importance of attention in this model. So it's the first part of this. And so what you're attending to is kind of setting the framework for your perception of reality. And so, people like Ian McGilchrist, they talk about how attention is a moral act. Like with our deciding what to attend to and what not to attend to, we're really kind of setting the frame for our follow-on perception and the different parts of this model. So attending, we're noticing, we're aware of what is happening in the world. What are we paying attention to? And then the next step from after attending would be we're appreciating. So this is where we're exercising our discernment, our mental capacities. We're thinking critically. We're weighing options. We're picking our poison in this appreciation. And when I say appreciation, I mean it like terrain appreciation. So we're like, to appreciate something is to like really know the value and to understand it and to kind of parse it. That's when I say appreciation, that's what I mean. And then finally, action is the third step of this loop here, and that's where you're actually making moves out in the world. You're doing the thing, and like I said, you can short circuit parts. Like you can just go right from attend to act. If you have to act, in a very chaotic, instinctive mode. But ideally, you get to cycle through all these things non-linearly, and then these all build towards what I'm calling attunement, which is really kind of we're tuning in to the signal. We're trying to cut away all the noise, and so what attunement is really getting us into like right relationship with reality and with the thing. So I call this spiritual Uda. So what I'm saying is like we are attuning to the divine, the sacred, and whatever framework that makes sense to a human. So that sacred component, there's a tuning to your larger community, there's a tuning to other humans, and then there's like a tuning to yourself. So I kind of mean it in like all those ways. So what the focus of this model is to put yourself in right relationship with reality. And as we know, like right now we're in a stage where a lot of our old models and our old institutions are kind of breaking down because they are not in right relationship with reality. So this is just kind of an attempt to find an interior pattern deeper than Uda that describes how humans, properly put themselves in relationship with reality. So I hope that clears it up.
No, I think that was a fantastic 101 level class there. So how do you map this A-frame onto the OODA loop, as you mentioned, kind of a nested thing. What
Mhm.
was OODA missing?
Yeah. So initially, so I was, I'm a writer. I write fiction. So I was, really going deep on story. Last, probably 5-10 years of my life, been going deep on story structure. Really trying to master all of the, the ins and outs of writing. And so that, story structure. There's a lot of different structures out there. The base model, I would say, is like the Freytag pyramid that we all learn in English class. So and that's basically like kind of inciting incident, and then you kind of move through um different steps. So the one I focused on, the Freytag variant that I focused on, was the one that Sean Coyne and StoryGrid created. So they have like a 5-phase 5-phase steps for story. So and this scales for like an individual scene of a story or the entire narrative itself. So the way they frame it, you have an inciting incident. That's something that kind of throws the protagonist for a loop. Kind of, it's going to kind of threaten to kick him out of his normal world, him or her. Then we get to eventually that protagonist is trying to, they're trying to navigate reality in a particular way. So you can think of Mad Men. Don Draper's going through life. He's got his worldview. He's making decisions. And then the protagonist gets to a turning point where basically what they realize that the tactic that they're using to navigate reality is not working. So that is, known as the turning point in story grid methodology. And then that's going to prompt a crisis, which is basically a choice between two courses of action. And the crisis is, do I do X or do I do Y? And normally there's going to be a cost or a penalty for each course of action. And that's why it's a true dilemma. And then that is going to lead to a climax, which is like the enactment of that choice. They're actually going to take action on that decision that they made. And then the resolution would be the effect or the after effect of that decision, and then that's going to set the terms for like the next inciting incident. So that's basically just a quick narrative theory on a story. And obviously there's many different types of stories. There's different like Asia, Africa, they have different storytelling models. This is if you want to critique this narrative theory, you could say this is like Western focused perhaps, but I do think a lot of stories roughly follow these contours. And it's basically like I view story as like a technology that's helping humans navigate reality more effectively. So if I tell you a story, Kit, like we're around the campfire and I'm like, hey, I went down the valley yesterday. This is what happened. There were 3 tigers. There was a watering hole, this, that, and the other. Here's all the problems I encountered. Here's what I did. And then here's what happened. So I'm telling you that story. That is then like, that's a technology between us that's then going to make you stronger and more prepared to navigate reality. So you're like, okay, hey, if I go in that valley, like I know what to expect because of this story. So when I compare that to the OODA loop, similarly, the OODA loop is trying to describe how humans effectively navigate situations. So in my essay, I tried to align up where the OODA fits into like the Freytag pyramid as described by StoryGrid. And I've got kind of diagrams that show that part. But what I thought OODA was missing was probably a couple things. But the main point, I think, and it's not even really fair to Boyd, because Boyd was not like going for the sacred, the spiritual, divinity. He's not thinking about any of that stuff. He's thinking about prevailing in an adversarial conflict. So you've got a game, you want to win, or you're in an infinite game and you're trying to just innovate faster, get through things faster than your competitors. So although Boyd does talk about morality and he talks about moral warfare, a lot of Boyd's frame is just about prevailing in an adversarial situation. So I think that's that would be like my biggest beef with OODA as like an operating system. I wanted to create something that also talked about how humans collaborate and cooperate with each other. And yes, the case OODA can say, oh yes, we talk about that as well. But I just wasn't happy with, I just think it's too competitive in nature, and humans are very competitive, but we also cooperate a lot. So I wanted to focus on that, the non-competitive aspect of what humans are doing. So that's really, that would be kind of my big critique of OODA. I think that's what I'm trying to solve that OODA is not solving. And then as you can see, obviously Boyd himself was like, hey, iterate on what I'm doing. If you find something better, change it up. And, Mark McGrath and Paunch, they're definitely doing that. But I see them like, my critique of them would be like, you're twisting OODA and you're foregrounding orientation so much that you're actually almost like pulling orientation out of the loop and making that the top of a 3-sided pyramid. So that's basically what I'm doing with A-Frame, is making it like a 3-sided pyramid with, attunement at the very top. So all right, I'm just going to pause there and see what other questions that prompts from you.
It sounds like what you're saying then is that you're adding the relational dimension of OODA. I mean, obviously, like for instance, my work has orientation as a core thing in groups and whatnot, but your model also applies to groups and brings in that more relational, almost taking it even further than, say, trauma language or all of these other things, because it all fits in together. Like it's almost like an Uber synthesis, if I can use such a horrific term.
Yes, and that's really and that's what it all is. So what I did with this model is, I'm looking at a lot of cognitive science, psychology, complexity science, and then on the artistic side, I'm looking at other creative theories. A lot of it's informed by books like The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Every time I read a book on creativity or really anything, I'm always on the look for when I see like the word attunement or tune in, fine tune. And books like that, I definitely see a lot talking about tuning in. So I think that's really the language that I'm reaching for. I think the moment that we're in is a moment that we are talking about, like the sound metaphor I think is the right one for this moment. Like vibrations, frequencies, resonance, attunement. I think that's kind of like what we need in this age as we try to navigate reality appropriately for the moment. So yes, I'm looking at a lot of different I'm looking at a lot of different domains and theories and trying to like pull them all together into one model.
Are you a musically based person? And the reason I ask is because I find that people kind of go, and I hate generalities, but buckets, right? Visual thinkers, audio thinkers, kinetic thinkers, or
Mm-hmm.
touch based
Mm-hmm.
tactical kind of things. And I noticed that a lot of your work is audio based.
Yeah, and so that's a good question. Like I consider myself like musical intelligence is one of my challenges. You know, I definitely have always wanted to. I believe that like a musical intelligence is like a huge part of a human, and I always feel kind of sad that mine is not better developed. But I can just see it. I can see the importance of sound in music. I just can't like I don't have the it's not one of my skill sets. So I'm kind of I look at it from afar, like almost like jealously, like that I wish I had a better understanding of, pace and tempo and frequency, like all those different changes that I think a musical person just has like in their, mental Rolodex. That's something that I need to work on.
I love though that your discipline, your self-discipline, your intellectual discipline maybe is such that you gravitate toward the terms that describe an arena that you don't normally place yourself in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, I mean, I appreciate that. I think it's just I'm looking at it from a distance, and I'm like, this is the best way that we can like paint this situation in words, even if it's something that like I don't, particularly am skilled at. It's like something I want to educate myself in just to better understand like tempo and ranges and all those like, I guess, niche concepts from music theory. I think they hold a lot of promise to help us like relate to reality in this like, batshit insane modern world.
This is super fascinating for me because I am a musical person. And so the terms that you use speak to me on a level that sometimes other arenas do not. And I think that's part of why I find your stuff so interesting. Um, Especially when you connect attunement to things like flow states. And for me, as a musician, flow state has almost a different connotation to it than what you're describing.
Mm. So what is it? So how do you like what does flow mean to you? Like how do you describe it?
It's how a piece of music, it's almost hard to explain. It's like when you're playing the violin or you're playing the piano and you feel yourself coming out through your hands. Does that make sense? I know it sounds very woo-woo, and I am the last person to
Ah,
be a woo-woo.
no. So yeah, I'm here for the woo. Like like I wrote an essay called like what is the right amount of woo? Because I was basically like thinking like okay, like no woo is just a totally like sad, you're like an atheist materialist, very like reductive, like when you die you're just a bunch of molecules and like when you die you just like you're like a sack of inert matter, like that's like the no woo. And then there's like total woo, which is like the other side where it's like you're living your life by like all astronomy or astrology and like all these other things, which hey, if it works for people, like much respect, so like that's like but then there's like too much woo, right? Like there's where you're just taking it out of control. And then most of us like we're somewhere in the middle, like we got to have some like a little bit of enchantment in our life, otherwise it's just super boring. So yes, to your point, like the flow coming out of your hands, I think that definitely makes sense. Like you're just kind of like almost merging yourself with the music. So I can see that in other, flow based arenas as well.
Well, I've officially learned that I am far more woo than I initially ascribed myself. So, good job. I appreciate that. I'm going to embrace the woo. That kind of takes me into this spiritual OODA loop. What does attunement add So we talked about what Boyd was missing and in a
Yeah.
non-judgmental way, right? Because he's dealing with adversarial systems. But you're
Mhm.
adding this entire spiritual dimension, which also is interesting to me because I'm a Christian. And so
Mhm.
orientation for me does have almost a faith-based component
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. So I think that's, me as a writer, I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the world today, and like how do we prepare humans better for the world. I've got 3 kids, so I'm thinking about how to raise them to deal with this world. And the conclusion that I'm coming to, like, I grew up like very secular humanist, in a family, like, for us, like, religion was like Tammy Faye Baker and like Oral Roberts, like these kind of
That's
televangelists, which
horrible.
which I know it is, and that's not religion. I understand that, but like that's kind of like we just made fun of religion when I was growing up. And but over time, like, as I've studied religion and I've studied philosophy, I'm like, wow, like there's a lot to this. This is very sophisticated. This is around obviously for a reason. Like, humans invented this for a reason, and it's reconciling us to like the cosmos, to reality, to like whatever divine thing is out there. So to me, like, the biggest problem of the modern world is like we've lost our grounding with things that are above us and bigger than us. And I'm thinking of like a concept like the transcendentals, right? Like, so the true, the good, the beautiful, and then kind of the idea that there's this unity. So to me, like, any system that humans are going to use to navigate reality effectively should take that into consideration and should recognize that the spiritual, or the spiritual layer, the moral layer, however you want to construe it, like the value layer, that has to be predominant. Like, that has to be the biggest emphasis on, and as I study other thinkers, you see that value is like a real thing. It's not just this made up human construction that postmodernism would have us believe. It's like there is real value in the world, and everything from like an atom to a human are like seeking value. Like, we're making decisions. Small cellular organisms, they're going up like energy gradients, right? Like, they're turning left instead of right to go towards something. Like, they're valuing something. So value is kind of embedded in like almost every level of reality. So I wanted to situate this model, like, I wanted to foreground value and the spiritual layer as the most important layer. And yes, to our point, like, I don't even know what Boyd was. Like, I'm not sure if Boyd was religious at all. And again, like, he's not this Uda is not a spiritual model for him. Uda is a model to like prevail in air-to-air combat, and then to make yourself the most I forget what the increase your possibility for like free and independent action. I think that's like one of his big like goals for the OODA loop. So yes, I wanted to foreground the divine and the sacred, but I wanted to leave it like, I'm trying to leave it open so different people can like find their own resonance with it. So whether you think it's just nature, if you just think, hey, it's just Mother Earth, like, okay, like that's what we're connecting, we're revering, we're respecting, we're stewarding the earth, and that's what kind of we're doing with attunement.
It's kind of interesting because you're nesting it within Boyd, but you're also bringing it outside of Boyd. So let's take all of this, the spirituality, I can't even talk today, spirituality of it, and take it back into the adversarial systems that he actually meant it for.
Mhm.
Is the goal still attunement, or are you just looking to outmaneuver? Which kind of brings it back to, I guess what I'm asking is, are you simply at its core bringing a spiritual component to the OODA loop that can be used adversarially?
Well, yeah, and I think Boyd talks about the moral layer of conflict. So, from a Boydian perspective, he's saying, you need your like, and he's building on Sun Tzu, obviously, like with kind of the morale, the moral component of your conflict has to be right. Like, you have to be fighting, kind of a just fight, and that's you're getting your people behind you, right? Like, the society is behind the whatever the conflict is, and then your soldiers and sailors and airmen are behind. It's like this just fight. That's kind of the moral layer, and then the side that kind of has the better narrative and the better argument is more likely to prevail. And then obviously we see like Napoleon is saying like the moral is to the physical as 3-1. So that's on the like the Boydian So I think on attunement, I'm trying to get us to properly see reality without the biases and the filters, and then conduct ourselves like in best accordance with that. And so I think there could possibly be, daylight between acting, acting, totally through attunement and then success. So I think that's like, there are situations where like doing the right thing is going to get you like kicked out of office. It's going to like get you defeated. So I think that's probably a tension that I need to think through better. I think we can all think of, examples where like doing the right thing is going to get you in trouble. For example, like we love politicians to be very certain about things. We don't like them to say, well, I don't know. We want to believe that our leaders are like competent and confident. However, like a lot of the times they're just bullshitting, like they're just acting confident because they know that the public wants to see that. So that's like an unfortunate part about politics, is that we don't reward people that express like intellectual humility about situations. We reward people that like are completely cocksure and like almost like blindly optimistic. So I guess getting back to the question, I'm trying to think of the best ways to wrap up this answer. I think there are situations where you may like, as you're like, how do I relate to reality? You may see that what the right decision for yourself to like attune yourself to reality may be at odds with what it takes to succeed in a situation. And then I think that's where we have to like make hard decisions. And I'm not sure if I have like a good answer beyond that. So I apologize.
No, don't. That's what this was for, is to have this kind of thinking out loud discussion. What you're examining right now is price, right? Because every decision has a cost or a price to it, where, okay, success, well, first you have to define success, which I think every person has a different definition of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, for instance, success is adherence to my ethos, my moral code, my, the tenets of my faith, or all the things that go into that. And so if I say something or do something that gets me quote unquote success, money, power, whatever, but violates these other
Mm-hmm.
precepts, I'm not successful according to my own system. Whereas someone else, if they value money, power, then these other things become less important because they're
Yeah.
chasing the success, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed that your framework kind of assumes that the agents in the system can attend accurately to the arena that they're in. But as you know, the world is full of deliberate manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens then? You've got propaganda, you've got narrative warfare, you've got attention hijacking. How do you know you're attending accurately when there's so much willful, maybe even evil manipulation of the arena?
Yes, no, that is a great question. And so, yeah, I like the way that you frame that out with your definition of success versus like, the other moves you can make. And I think that's my other big, like, like my beef with Uda would be like, okay, so his goal is to preserve your ability for free and independent action, but like, to what end? Like just to survive. And maybe sometimes that's a good enough answer, but like, to me, it's like, we need to be surviving like for a reason. And that's to complexify life, to add to the harmony of the world. And like, we're building, a flourishing system for generations to come. And so it's not just like succeed just at all costs and like throw all your morals away, like exactly, to your point. So, so that's probably like that's a partial answer to like the question before, but to what you're saying right now, like how do you effectively navigate this like cesspool that we're in? Yeah, I mean, like that is like the question of the age, right? So we've got deliberate, we've got corporations that are shaping things, we've got governments that are shaping things, we've got all sorts of adversaries and actors that are they're really just incentivized to hijack our attention, hijack our amygdalas, and just get us outraged and fearful. So yeah, so I think to answer that, there's probably like an ecology of things we can do. So John Vervaeke talks about an ecology of practices that we need to put together in our daily lives, like contemplation, meditation, various activities. So I think to effectively separate the wheat from the chaff in this maddening modern world, it requires us to work on ourselves, like our operating system of ourselves. So we've got to find the self-care at the base level, the morning routines that put us in a good a quiet, relaxed, poised frame of mind, ready to interact with the world. So for me, it's like getting up before the kids, doing breathing, prayer, mindfulness, doing a workout before the kids get up. And then it's like, okay, now I'm ready to like get them off to school. Now I'm ready to like meet the world. And then, so that would be kind of like your personal operating system. Then all these other inputs, it requires us to be informed. And that's not just like read the daily news. That's like reading about, there's plenty of great resources out there, like, guys like Tristan Harris and the Center for Humane Technology. They have a podcast. They have they have the one documentary, and then there's like a new one coming out on AI that should be out in the next few weeks. But so there's, I guess my point is, there's avenues out there for people to educate themselves on like what is actually happening with these algorithms, what's happening with what are the incentives, what are the agendas of various actors out there on the world stage, and so then that gets into like what is your what's your digital hygiene? So like what are you doing? What is causing you to feel fragmented? Are you just melting your brain on 1 minute videos, or are you engaging with longer content to help build your individual discernment? And then that goes into like your hygiene, your like your diet, like your digital information diet. You want to make sure you're not like eating Sour Patch Kids all day. Like you're actually eating like your digital vegetables, which would be like finding sources that are reputable to you. Like there's just so many like conflict entrepreneurs out there that are just using the hijacking people's amygdalas with fear and anger to make to get engagement, to make money. So so I guess my answer would be like, take care of your personal operating system first, and then build the discernment through like, finding reputable sources online that can, they're not beholden to like other interests, and then, kind of like using them to build your sense-making orientation towards the world.
So all of this operating system, like you talk about your morning routine and things like that. And in your work, you connect that attunement with flourishing and transcendence, and you have all of these kind of higher values, so to speak, that you're engaging in intentionally through your actions. But it makes you more effective, right? You do these things and now you can face the day, you can make good decisions, all of this good stuff. So I have kind of a two-part question that I was scribbling here. You have a lot of historical actors who were really, really effective, right? And really, really immoral. And not just from a subjective standpoint, but objectively so, where any reasonable person can look at their actions and go, yeah, that is not okay, what you're doing. So my first part of my question is, does attunement make somebody actually better or just more capable in their own system? Let's start with that part.
Yeah. So that is a good question. My sense, I think my intention is that it makes us better at like aiming at, overall flourishing for, for the whole group. I think when I talk about attunement, it means like you're gaining a certain understanding about reality and like where humans are situated within that, kind of cosmos. And once you develop that sort of framework, once you develop a worldview that situates humans properly, which is kind of like, we're not the end all be all. Like, we're just part of nature. We're part of the world, and we have, an obligation to, add to the harmony of the world. And that sounds like that's a very like wooish, hand wavy statement. So I think what I'm getting at is like, you're figuring out how can you contribute best to this world? So there's a little bit of like, ikigai in there, where you're like figuring out like what your individual talents are, and then like what, how you can contribute to the world, and like, get paid for your talents. So you're trying to find like, where do you fit in this process? So could this model, if we get some dark triad folks that are like, yeah, like, let's take this model and let's like, use it to, for world domination. I'd have to think about this one more, if it can just be totally warped. And maybe it can, but I think my hope is that like, as people, are going through and they're like putting themselves in right relationship with reality, that includes like the ideas that we all have an obligation to contribute to, the world, and to improve it in some fashion. But yes, like to your point, like if we're devil's advocating this thing, it's like there could be potential to abuse it. But I do think like, and that's why I'm trying to remove it a step from the adversarial nature of OODA, and pull it, and that's why I keep calling it a deeper pattern, because it's like, ideally like it sits above OODA, and it's like also, not only is it talking about competition, but it's talking about collaboration, cooperation, like that side of it. So if I'm trying to actually answer your question, I would say I don't know yet. I don't know if it can be abused by dark triad bad actors.
That sounds like a perfect premise for a second appearance. So,
All right.
you've brought up group dynamics, and that's where a lot of other people's models sometimes break down, but your framework also focuses more on the individual agent. So, the next question that I want to know is, in your model, can a group actually become attuned, or will they eventually shift or drift, maybe is a better word, toward a more shared narrative, more like the story that we protect over reality, narrative capture? And now you're kind of more in my world, right? But how does your model answer that?
Yeah, so I definitely think, if we look at like group dynamics, you have the whole like storming, norming, performing, adjourning. I think I'm missing some of the ings there, but yeah, so once a group is together, ideally there's, some alignment, if we're talking, an ad hoc, decentralized network, or we're talking about, a small group out in the wild. You're getting clear on what your values are. So you're going to create like alignment between humans. So if you're, however it starts, right? Like, here's this, we value X, Y, and Z. Like, we value, individual initiative, self-reliance, critical thinking. Then you're going to start to attract other humans that are like resonating with those values as well. So I think, and then as the group is like navigating reality, they're going to be encountering challenges, and that group attunement, it may be like it may be a contested, tumultuous thing as the group is like trying to come to consensus on, how they should relate to reality. So I think individual agents are going to like pull that in different directions. So you may have, group members may leave if they're not like in alignment with the way that the group is deciding to go. But I think initially you can get people, attuned together for like a common mission. And then they're going to have to, I think at that point, you're going to have to put in the, the structures into the group model that kind of allow constructive pushback, feedback, criticism, back and forth. And that actually is like a positive thing, because then it's like helping the group, get closer to reality. Like it's helping them find the signal. I think in cognitive science, it'd be called like opponent processing, which is like where there's, two different things that are, they're kind of like fighting against each other, but the product is like a better product, more closely aligned with reality. So, and I guess in politics, it'd be like the checks and balances, ideally between like the three branches of government. Like those, they're set up to be like adversarial by nature, so that it arrives at like a solution that is like the best fit for reality.
Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm trying to come up with my next question. Um, for the last question, let's go ultimate pushback. If attunement means that I am more aligned with reality and all of the dimensions of that reality, spiritual, will bring in all those other dimensions. How do we handle the fact that myself as an agent versus you as an agent, we're going to experience different realities based on our models, our incentives, our information, our environments? Would you agree or disagree with that point?
Yes. No, I think everybody. So what I don't like, everybody has their own reality. Everybody's, this is
Right.
my truth. This is your truth. Like, I'm not a fan of a lot of the, that sort of language, but I do think like, you have the experience of your life and your education, and then, and then I have, the same thing. So like, we're going to come at things from different perspectives. So yeah, like we're going to definitely look at things, differently. I'm a big fan of like, the saying like pick your poison, because like so much of life is just choices and trade-offs. So you may be making different choices and calculations than I am based on your education and experience. um, but that being said, like there are certain things that are, I believe like there are values that exist like outside of humans that we can strive for, and you know how we strive for them, will help or hinder, our overall progress, in life. Defining progress as like, how you're doing in life. Like, are you flourishing? Are you struggling? Um, are you getting into like, are you causing yourself more problems with the decisions that you're making? So yes, we can come to different conclusions, but I think there are, transcendent values that maybe that we're striving to meet them in like different ways based on our individual like agentic, context within the arena. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if you have like follow-ups, yeah, just hit me with
No, it
those.
absolutely it answers that question because, and I think I need to apologize because I don't think I communicated my question appropriately. First of all, I absolutely agree with the idea that there is an objective reality, there is an objective truth. Um, there are also varying perceptions within this objective truth. For instance, I used to work for a guy who swore up and down that if two people are given this exact same information, they will come to the exact same conclusions, which is phenomenally not true.
Yeah.
And so the core question that I was going to ask next was, is attunement actually achievable, or is it an ongoing recalibration of aspiration?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I think it's always an aspiration in that like we should always be striving to like, in the Christian context, like we're striving to be Christ like. So we're trying to be like him in how he navigated the world. And then, in other traditions, you're trying to aspire to like be the sage, so you're trying to go for you're trying to reach for wisdom. You're trying to reach beyond yourself, to try to, you know, make the more mature, wiser decision. So, are you ever going to get there? Like, no, probably not. It's probably like, just like the word orientation, like, you're constantly like, it's a moving, dynamic target. And, just like reality is dynamic and moving, you have to constantly be, changing yourself. So like, even if you think of like, Cher, right? Like the artist Cher, like she has morphed and changed over her career. Like she's totally, she stayed in the limelight. She stayed famous for, I don't know how many, like 50 years, like something ridiculous. But over the course of her life, like she's had to like reinvent herself like multiple times to deal with like the change in reality. So, and that's what all humans, lifelong learning is like an essential component of humans, whether we like want to believe that or not. Because if you're not learning, you're just going to start to calcify, and you're not going to be as responsive to reality. So, can you ever get there? I don't think, yeah, probably not perfectly, but the idea is that we separate enough of the wheat from the chaff um, to effectively navigate reality. So yes, different humans are going to do that in different ways, and then the group may, the group may not may encounter a situation where members of the group, leave, and that I think that's just going to have to get navigated on like a situation by situation basis. But I guess the main idea of like attunement is like just you're trying to see through all of the illusions, to be like less, to be like less deluded, to be less wrong, um, recognizing that we're all wrong. Like none of us are seen, all of us are seen through like all these veils that are hiding our vision. We're all touching the elephant of reality differently, right? So like I'm touching the tusk, and you're touching like one of the elephant legs, and like we're kind of seeing it a little bit differently. Um, so I guess the main takeaway would be like we're all deluded, but this is like a model to try to help us, be a little bit less deluded and more humble about what we understand about reality.
So if somebody they've listened to this podcast and they say, okay, I want to become more attuned to reality, what's the first thing they should change?
Mm. Cool. Yeah, I would just, I'm a big fan of like just starting with yourself. So you've got to figure out, just do kind of like a self diagnostic, like what's your daily life like? What are your information sources? And then, really like, at this point in in 2026, it's like, I have a lot of skepticism with like, traditional media sources of any stripe. So I'll definitely like take in traditional media, but I'm looking for, the sense makers that help me. So, the Marine Corps has what they call a directed telescope. It's like a leadership technique where basically like senior leaders, they have like junior members of their formations that they kind of they lean on as like sense makers. So, like an O6 has got like some junior, an O6 is like a captain or a colonel. And they are a captain in the Navy is an O6, and then that's a colonel in the Army and Marine Corps. But senior leaders have junior leaders that they kind of pulse and they talk to get at the ground truth. So really, like you're trying to get at ground truth. So you're starting with yourself. You're like, okay, what am I doing? What am I doing to help me have like a clear, calm, poised mind? And there's various things you can figure out, and so you're just going to kind of experiment till you find like what helps you personally. So maybe it's this type of meditation, maybe it's that type of meditation, maybe it's just breathing, maybe it's a very hard workout first thing in the morning, and that prepares you. Maybe it's tapping, maybe it's whatever it is. Like you're basically figuring out like how do I create like a very calm and poised like mental operating system to go into the world. So once you've kind of like figured out what works for you individually, then it's like, okay, now audit your digital information diet. How are you taking in information about the world? It's like, and then, just like, intelligence, right? Like we want multi-source intelligence. Like you want to multi-source your sense making apparatus. So you have like people you don't agree with, people you agree with, random people in the middle. And you're just trying to like get at ground truth through, you're trying to get as many touches of the elephant of reality as you can. And when I say that, I'm using that metaphor of like the blind men and the elephant that are all,
Mm-hmm.
touching it in different levels. And they're like, no, it's this, no, it's this. And so the idea is that you're kind of drawing like a clover leaf around reality, like a four-leaf clover, and you're trying to touch it in different places to get a better sense. So that would be just to sum all that up. I would say you're taking care of your personal operating system, making sure that's calm and poised to meet reality, and then you're figuring out your information sources and making them diverse to kind of help you get at the ground truth.
Perfect. Hey, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Likewise, Kip. Thank you.